Picture this. It's December 1914. You are 19 years old, standing knee-deep in mud inside a trench that stretches as far as you can see in both directions. The trench is 3 feet wide. It smells of cold earth, gunpowder, and death. You have been here for months. 100 meters in front of you, across a stretch of wrecked, shell-cratered land that both sides call no man's land, are the enemy, men you've never met, men who, 6 months ago, you had no reason to hate. Now they've been ordered to kill you, and you've been ordered to kill them. The war was supposed to be over by Christmas. That's what everyone said when it started. Home by Christmas. But Christmas is here now, and the war is nowhere near over. In fact, it's barely begun. Then something strange happens. It starts on Christmas Eve. You hear it before you understand it, a sound coming from the German trenches, drifting across no man's land in the cold night air. It takes you a moment to recognize it. It's singing. Christmas carols. In German, yes, but you know the melody. You've sung it yourself. And then someone, nobody knows who, climbs out of a trench, and instead of shooting, the other side waves back. What follows over the next 24 hours is one of the most extraordinary events in human history. And right at the center of it, as it almost always is, there is a football. To understand why that Christmas moment matters so much, you need to understand what the world looked like in 1914. Europe in the summer of 1914 was a continent that had been building toward conflict for decades. A network of alliances, imperial rivalries, and nationalist tensions had created a powder keg. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in Sarajevo on June 28th, the fuse was lit. Within 6 weeks, most of Europe was at battle. Germany and Austria-Hungary on one side, France, Britain, Russia, and others on the other. Millions of men were mobilized almost overnight. The soldiers who marched off that summer were, in many cases, young men who had grown up playing football together, watching football together, living ordinary lives. In Britain especially, football had become the working-class sport. Factory workers, miners, dock workers, the same men who now filled the trenches, had been filling stands at clubs across England, Scotland, and Wales just months before. In fact, the Football Association in England was actively recruiting through the sport. Entire battalions were formed from players and fans of the same clubs. The 17th Middlesex Regiment became known as the Football Battalion. It recruited over 600 professional and amateur players. Some of the best players in England enlisted. Several of them would never come home. By December 1914, the opening optimism of the war had collapsed completely. The Western Front had turned into a static nightmare. Both sides were dug into trenches stretching nearly 500 miles from the English Channel to Switzerland. Hundreds of thousands of men had already died, and the war had been going for less than 5 months. The soldiers in those trenches were exhausted, freezing, and already deeply disillusioned. They had been promised an adventure. They had found a slaughterhouse. That is the world on Christmas Eve, 1914. It began, as best historians can tell, with Christmas trees. German military command had arranged for small fir trees, Tannenbaums, to be sent to their soldiers at the front. On Christmas Eve, soldiers began placing them on the edges of their trenches, lighting candles on the branches so they glowed in the darkness. British soldiers watching from the opposite side didn't know what to make of it at first. One British rifleman, J. Reading, later wrote a letter home describing the night. German soldiers were shouting across in English, calling out greetings, asking if there were any spare bottles of drink. What happened next was entirely unofficial. No orders were given. No generals authorized it. It spread through pure human impulse. One soldier deciding independently that tonight he was not going to shoot. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 30,000 and 100,000 soldiers took part in various truces along the Western Front that Christmas. Not everywhere. In some sectors, the fighting continued without pause, and men died on Christmas Day just like any other day. But in dozens of locations, something remarkable was happening. Soldiers emerged from their trenches with their hands up, not in surrender, but in greeting. They crossed no man's land. They shook hands with men they had been trying to kill. They exchanged cigarettes, chocolate, schnapps, buttons, insignia, photographs of their families. They helped each other bury the dead who had been lying in the mud between the trenches for weeks. British officer Graham Williams of the London Rifle Brigade described the scene: the German trenches illuminated with lanterns, carols drifting across the dark, a beautiful moonlit night with frost on the ground. And then men on both sides climbing out into the open. One British officer wrote in his diary, "They say they are not going to fire again if we don't, but of course we must and shall do, but it doesn't seem right to be killing each other at Christmas time." It wasn't right. And for one night, on portions of the most violent stretch of land on Earth, they didn't. And then came the football. The most detailed account we have comes from Lieutenant Johannes Niemann of the German 133rd Saxon Infantry Regiment. Niemann described the scene in a BBC television interview in the late 1960s, one of the most complete first-hand records of what actually happened. According to Niemann, on Christmas morning the mist was slow to clear. Then his orderly burst into his dugout with news. Both German and Scottish soldiers had come out of their trenches and were meeting in no man's land. Niemann grabbed his binoculars and looked over the trench parapet. What he saw was soldiers from both sides exchanging cigarettes, chocolate, and schnapps. And then, and this is the part that has become legendary, a Scottish soldier appeared with a football that, in Niemann's words, seemed to come from nowhere. Within minutes, a match had started. They used their caps to mark the goalposts. The field was frozen mud, pockmarked with shell craters. There were no referees, no proper goals, no linesmen. Just men, enemies by law, neighbors by circumstance, kicking a ball around in the space where they had been trying to kill each other. The final score, according to Niemann, Germany 3, Britain 2. Now, and this is important, historians have debated the details of that specific match for over a century. Some accounts say the Scots won 4-1. British military records don't officially confirm it. The ground was in such poor condition, shell craters, frozen mud, unburied bodies nearby, that a real organized match with proper rules would have been nearly impossible. What is not in dispute is that football was played. Multiple accounts from multiple sectors of the front describe soldiers kicking balls, or improvised balls made from tin cans or balled-up clothing, across no man's land on Christmas Day 1914. The National Football Museum in Britain holds diary entries, letters, and photographs from the period confirming it. One diary from Lieutenant Charles Brockbank notes, "We had found a little rubber ball, so of course a football match came off and we exchanged various things." In other sectors, soldiers used empty corned beef cans as balls. In one account, a straw-stuffed balaclava served as the football. They didn't need the right equipment. They just needed to play. Think about what that means for a moment. These men, cold, malnourished, living in holes in the ground, having watched their friends die, their first instinct when given a moment of peace was to find a ball and start a game. That is not a small thing. The high commands on both sides were not pleased. British and German generals understood immediately what the Christmas Truce represented, and it terrified them. Not the truce itself, but what it meant. If soldiers could look across a battlefield, see the humanity of the enemy, share a meal and a game with them, how were you supposed to get them to kill each other in the morning? The answer, it turned out, was with great difficulty. After Christmas 1914, both military commands implemented strict new measures to prevent any repeat. Troop rotations were accelerated so soldiers didn't spend long enough in one position to build familiarity with the enemy across the way. Surveillance was increased. Officers who allowed fraternization faced disciplinary action. And the war itself changed. By 1915, new weapons and tactics had made the conflict far more brutal. Poison gas, long-range artillery barrages, large-scale assaults that killed tens of thousands in a single day. The human face of the enemy became harder to see through the fog of industrialized slaughter. There were small, isolated truces in 1915, 1916, and even 1917. But nothing on the scale of Christmas 1914 ever happened again. The commanders made sure of it. The war went on for 4 more years. By the time it ended in November 1918, over 17 million people were dead. Many of the men who played football in no man's land that Christmas were among them. We don't know the names of most of the players. We don't have a full photograph of the match. We can't tell you the exact rules they used or who scored first. History is rarely that neat. What we do know is this. On December 25, 1914, somewhere in the frozen mud of Belgium and northern France, men who had been ordered to kill each other chose for a few hours to play instead. And that choice, spontaneous, unofficial, unauthorized, became one of the most enduring stories in the history of both sport and war. Jules Rimet, the man who founded the FIFA World Cup in 1930, spent his career arguing that football could be a force for peace between nations. He believed genuinely that the sport had a power that went beyond entertainment, that putting two countries on a field together under the same rules was a form of diplomacy. You can debate how well that idea has aged. We've covered in other episodes how the World Cup has been used for propaganda, how FIFA became corrupt, how the tournament has as much shadow as it has light. But Christmas 1914 is the purest version of what Rimet was talking about. Nobody organized it, nobody planned it, no governing body, no sponsorship deal, no television rights. Just soldiers, a ball, and the oldest human instinct in the book, to play. The truce happened before the World Cup existed, before FIFA was the institution it became, before football was a billion-dollar global industry. It happened in the worst possible conditions, in the middle of the worst conflict the world had seen up to that point, and it happened anyway. That's the thing about football. At its core, stripped of everything else, it's just people agreeing to follow the same rules and see who wins. It doesn't require you to speak the same language. It doesn't require you to agree on politics, religion, or history. It just requires a ball and enough space to play. In December 1914, that turned out to be enough to stop a war, for one day. The Christmas Truce of 1914 is commemorated today by a monument near the village of Frélinguienne in northern France, close to where Niemann's match is believed to have taken place. At its base, people leave footballs and club pennants. They still do it every year. In 2014, on the 100th anniversary, the British and German armies played a formal commemorative match at Aldershot Town FC in England. The British Army won 1-0. Both sides agreed it wasn't really the point. Every World Cup, FIFA runs promotional material about the power of football to bring people together. Most of the time, that sounds like marketing. In 1914, it was just true. Subscribe. Next week, we're asking a different kind of question, one that football fans argue about more than almost anything else, a rule that was so badly broken that it nearly destroyed the game. We're talking about the offside rule and the century of chaos it took to almost get it right.